Yeah, okay.
Great. Okay. So we are now starting off. Okay. So last time we were focusing on the concept of the question of whether a person's entitled to, is permitted to put themselves in a state of health risk in order to save other people's lives. We talked a lot about doctors and physicians, people who are going, frontline workers who are putting themselves in a hospital setting, in a dangerous setting that could save lives, but also could jeopardize their own life. So that's what we talked about last week. What I want to focus on today is this question of triage, meaning if you have limited resources, you can't save everyone. You want to save everyone. In an ideal situation, we do save everyone, and probably most times we do save everyone. But when we can't save everyone, what do we do? So what I want to start with, we're going to do a couple different things, and the likelihood is that we got a little bit late start today, and I also imagine that we're going to go, there's a lot to do, so we may end up spreading this out into this week and next week. It's supposed to be a 3-week series anyway, so it might just be that this takes 2 weeks, and then next week we'll just finish this, and whatever we were going to do next week, we'll just do another time. But so what I want to look at first, we're going to look at the early rabbinic sources in the Mishnah and the Talmud, and then sort of go from there, from 2,000 years ago until 3 months ago, looking at different rabbinic approaches to this. So we'll start off with the very first source. I'll go ahead and read it. It's the Gemara in Masechet Pesachim. Well, actually, I don't know. Mark, I think you're probably still eating. And Marvin, I don't know if you want to read, or I can read.
Sorry to read.
Okay, you can go ahead and read in the English if you want. All right, I'll read it out loud. The Gemara now considers which prohibitions are permitted in times of mortal danger. So Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehud in this first source, the sages who Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehud the sages who discussed this issue counted the votes of those assembled and concluded in the upper story of the house of Nitzah in the city of Lod. With regard to all other transgressions in the Torah, if a person is told, transgress this prohibition and you will not be killed, he may transgress that prohibition and not be killed. Right? If someone says, you have to eat this hamburger or we're going to kill you, so you can eat the hamburger. Because because the preservation of his own life overrides all the Torah's prohibitions. This is the halacha concerning all prohibitions, except for those of idol worship, forbidden sexual relations, and bloodshed. Concerning those prohibitions, one must allow himself to be killed rather than transgress them. And the Gemara asks, later on in the Talmud, it asks, from where do we derive this halacha with regard to a murderer himself? That one must allow himself to be killed rather than commit murder. Like, how do I know that? And the Talmud analyzes all this and says, well, how do we know about idolatry, and how do we know about forbidden sexual relationships? And I was like, how do we know about murder? How do I know that I can't kill someone in order to save myself from being killed? And the Gemara answers, it is based on logical reasoning that one life is not preferable to another, and therefore it is no need for a verse to teach this halacha. So you can't find any verse in the Torah anywhere that indicates that you have to die before killing someone else. And the Gemara relates an incident to demonstrate this, as when a certain person came before Rabbah and said to him, the Lord of my place, a local official, said to me, go kill so-and-so, and if not, I will kill you. What should I do? Right? Someone asked Rabbah, what do I do? And Rabbah said to him, it is preferable that he should kill you and you should not kill. And the explanation that he gives in Aramaic and then in English, he says, Mi yemar didama didach sumak tfei, dilma dama dehu gavra sumak tfei. Who is to say that your blood is redder, that your life is worth more than the life of the one who wants to kill you to kill? Perhaps that man's blood is redder. This is a logical reasoning, is the basis of the halacha that one may not save his own life by killing another. Right? So the Talmud here is concluding that on the basis of svara, on the basis of logical reasoning, we can see that there's no way. Who can say whose blood is redder? Who can say whose life is more valuable than someone else's life? So you can't start playing this game of whose life is more valuable, right? So you have to be willing to die. The same thing, essentially the same thing comes in the second source, in this Mishnah in Ohalot, talking about, excuse me, talking about a woman who's, I don't know, the child may be breached, is not able to, the mother is not able to deliver the child, and then it seems that it's actually going to, if the child continues to come out in the orientation or direction that the child is coming, it could end up, it would very likely kill the mother. So in that situation, where the Mishnah says, she's having difficulty giving birth, and essentially they kill the child, they kill this fetus in order to save the life of the mother. Essentially aborting the fetus in order to save the life of the mother, because otherwise she would die. Because her life comes before the life of the fetus. Yatsa, once the child is out a certain amount, what that amount is, it's hard to, I don't know if we want to go into that discussion right now, but at a certain point, we no longer consider this to be a fetus, we consider it to be a child, a human. And once we've reached that point, the Mishnah here is identifying Yatsa Rubo, once the majority of the child is out, it's no longer the status of a fetus, it now is a human. At that point, you can't touch him. Even if it's going to mean that the mother's going to die, we can't choose whose life, right? We don't know, using the language of the Talmud in the first source, we don't know whose blood is redder, and therefore we are not permitted to take one life to save another life. Right? And so this is what's being raised in these first two sources, the idea that there is no way for us to evaluate, or at least the Talmud is suggesting that we can't choose life A over life B. Now the question of who's to say whose blood is redder, how can you say your blood is any redder than anyone else's? So that's an interesting question. The question is that a sincere question, or is that a rhetorical question? Meaning, is the Talmud there saying it's impossible for us to know whose life is more valuable, and therefore you have to step back, you can't do anything? Or is the Talmud saying that in some circumstances, it's impossible to know whose blood is redder, but if you could determine whose blood is redder, so to speak, then you could act on that. And so that's the question that authorities are going to be bothered by or struggling with. And fundamentally, when the Talmud says, who knows whose blood is redder, is that really a rhetorical question, or is that a sincere question that there could actually be an answer to? Maybe the answer is, according to some opinions, maybe the answer is, and we'll see that, maybe the answer is, I can tell you whose blood is redder, and therefore, if person A their blood is redder than person B, then save person A. So this is the question here. In the third source, we have a responsa. This is in the Nod de Yehuda Rabbi Yechezkel Landau. I took from online a brief biographical sketch of who he was. 1713, Poland, studied in Poland, chief rabbi of Prague and all Bohemia, represented the Jews before the Austrian government. Famous collection of responsa is considered classic and authoritative, although some of his responses were controversial. So here's what he says on the next page.
I ask a question?
Please.
With regard to the first three items, idol worship. What if somebody is told you have to worship this idol, otherwise I'll kill you, but so the person goes through the motions, but doesn't really worship.
Yeah, so unfortunately that has been, and there has been extensive conversation about that exact point, because unfortunately this is that's not been an uncommon situation where Jews were said, bow to the cross or we're going to kill you. And so that's a longer conversation, but yeah, that's something that has unfortunately been discussed for hundreds, if not thousands of years. There's been that discussion about, committing idolatry, but if idolatry has to do with one's belief system, and if you don't change your belief system, is that a sort of a workaround? And that's an excellent question, but one beyond what I'm really prepared to talk about. But it's a good question. I mean, I think you'll probably find the answer is yes and no, or it's the same but it's different. But I don't know enough.
Okay.
But it's a good question. So here's what the Noda B'Yehuda is raising in this next source, Rabbi Yechezkel Landau. He says the following: he says, I don't understand those people, those who question why Maimonides permits killing a fetus only when it is a rodef. That is, a person trying to kill the other person, in this case the mother. Arguing that it is not a capital crime to kill a fetus, but it is to kill a mother. Meaning, there were people who noticed that Maimonides, when he's talking about this situation of a fetus who's, if the pregnancy goes to full term and is born, would endanger the life of the mother. And Maimonides says it's permitted to kill the fetus, abort the fetus, because that the fetus is what's called a rodef, is essentially trying to kill the mother. And you can kill someone who's trying to kill someone else. Meaning if Joe is trying to kill Fred, you can kill Joe to save Fred's life. So if the fetus is trying to kill the mother, you can kill the fetus. And Rabbi Yechezkel Landau was observing that there were people who were bothered by Maimonides saying that, because it sounds like what Maimonides is saying is that the only reason you can abort the fetus is because the fetus is trying to kill the mother. And the questioners, what Rabbi Yechezkel Landau was bothered by, is the questioners therefore are assuming that the fetus should be permitted to be killed and the mother not. Why? Because he points out that killing a mother, the woman, that's a capital crime. Killing a person is a capital crime. Killing a fetus is not a capital crime. So there are those who were bothered by Maimonides and said, why does Maimonides say the only reason you can kill the fetus is because it's a rodef? You should be able to kill the fetus regardless, because it's not a capital crime to kill the fetus. Right? So that's the question that was being that Rabbi Yechezkel Landau is observing. Rabbi Yechezkel Landau says, I don't understand that question. I don't understand why people say that it should be permitted to kill the fetus because it's not a capital crime. To say that, right? He says, I don't understand this because those say it's permissible, because who says it's permissible to kill a treifa in order to save someone who is healthy? Literally, the word he uses is a shalem. Even though it is not a capital crime to kill a treifa, it is still forbidden to actively kill a treifa. Meaning, in the world of various different areas of Jewish law, when it comes to like kosher animals and people, there's a category called a treifa. What the treifa is, that person or an animal can be in the category of a treifa, and that means that according to modern medical understandings, that person or animal is not going to live it's going to die within the next 12 months. This is relevant for animals all the time. That what does glatt kosher mean? When you say a cow is, you get meat that's glatt kosher. So glatt kosher means that the lungs are smooth. And the reason that they check the lungs is because they're concerned if a cow has a punctured lung, maybe it wouldn't live 12 months, and then it's a treifa, and then it's not kosher to eat. And so that's a lot of the laws of kashrut deal with the question of, is an animal a treifa or not? Is it going to survive or not? And so it also could apply to people. And what Rabbi Yechezkel Landau was saying is that you may think, there may be someone who thinks you could kill the fetus purely because it's not really a living thing yet. Maybe it's the status of a treifa. He says, look, from a halachic perspective, if you had a person who doctors said was going to die within 12 months, they are a treifa. And if someone went ahead and killed that person who's a treifa, that's not considered a capital crime. It's forbidden, but it's not considered a capital crime. What Rabbi Yechezkel Landau was bothered by is that there are people who seemed to argue that since it's not a capital crime to kill a treifa, therefore it must be permitted to kill a treifa. And therefore he argues that there are those people who would think that following that line of reasoning, then it would be okay to kill the fetus because the fetus is less than a person. It's the treifa, it's not really alive yet. And so you could certainly kill the fetus before, and not, because it's not a capital crime to kill the fetus, but it is a capital crime to kill the mother. And so Rabbi Yechezkel Landau is bothered by that whole notion because he says, who says that? Why would you ever think that it's permissible to kill? Okay, it might not be a capital crime to kill a treifa, to kill someone who's going to die anyway, but that doesn't mean that it's permitted to kill a treifa. You're not allowed to kill a treifa. You're not allowed to kill someone who's going to die anyway, even though you say it's not a capital crime. Just because it's not a capital crime doesn't mean it's now permitted. That's Rabbi Yechezkel Landau's point right here, is that he says there are those people who seem to have that suggestion, but that's bizarre. There's no way that could possibly be. That's the Noda B'Yehuda's position. Essentially, saying that when the Talmud said in that first source, who can say whose blood is redder? He's saying that's a rhetorical question. It's impossible to say whose blood is redder. You can't argue that, well, this person's about to die anyway, so their blood is their life is not as valuable because they're about to die anyway, so you can go ahead and kill them. Because Galando says that's absurd. No, that's not acceptable. It is forbidden to kill a treifa, even though it might not be a capital crime. The Minchat Chinuch, and I give you his background, lived a little after, and Minchat Chinuch and others, 1801, born in Galicia, 1801, distinguished rabbinic family. Okay, he says the following, and he says, "V'hine had shvichut damim yahareg v'al yavor." That which killing someone is forbidden under all costs, even if it's going to kill you. He says, "Nira pashut." He says it seems obvious. Di'im onsin echad miYisrael laharog ubarim. Let's say you have a situation where there is someone who requires Jews to kill fetuses. You have to kill a fetus. Someone says, "I'm going to kill you unless you kill this fetus, unless you abort this fetus." He says, "Bevadai einu mechuyav limsor nafsho." He says, certainly you don't have to give your life in that situation. What do you mean? It's murder. You can't kill. He says, no. Kilo shanu my chazid. We don't apply the principle of whose blood is redder to a fetus. Lav nefeshu, because it's not really alive. And then he talks about that case earlier, but when you can kill the fetus, abort the fetus, if it's going to kill the mother, he says that's a whole thing because it's not really alive. It's not really a nefesh. He says, v'gam treifa, and also a treifa. He calls out specifically a treifa, someone who's going to die within the next 12 months. Kevan debiyarti le'el delav nefeshu. He says, according to my opinion, someone who's going to die in the next 12 months is not really considered alive. They're not really considered a nefesh. And therefore, imken lo shanu my chazid. He says, in that case, you don't apply my chazid. In other words, the Minchat Chinuch understands that when the Talmud says, who can say whose blood is redder? He's saying, well, okay, but that means that if there was a case where you could say whose blood is redder, then you absolutely should act on it. And so in a situation where you have a treifa, you have someone who's not really going to live, he's comfortable saying, well, that person's blood is not as red. That person's blood is not as valuable. That person's life is not as valuable because they're about to die. And so the Minchat Chinuch is suggesting that there are circumstances when you actually can make that call. Most circumstances, we throw up our hands and say, it's impossible to tell whose blood is redder. But in some circumstances, the Minchat Chinuch is suggesting that you can make that call. And so that's the big machloket that we're going to see is going to rear its head later on. This machloket, this argument between the Minchat Chinuch and the Noda B'Yehuda as to whether we can ever make the claim that person A's life is more valuable than person B's. Right? Your Noda B'Yehuda thinks we can never, ever assume person A is more valuable than person B. And so we can't kill person B because to save person A's life because you can't know whose life is more valuable. The Noda B'Yehuda says, maybe not. Maybe there are certain people, humans, lives that we can say are less valuable. You know, we'd say that if it was a choice between, you kill this dog or I'm going to kill you, we'd all agree that you'd have to kill the dog to save, like the dog's life is not as valuable as the human life. But in humans, the Minchat Chinuch would say you could probably do the same thing. There are certain lives that aren't as valuable. Now, that's a very complicated thing of how you actually decide that. I mean, he's saying, look, if you can have someone you definitively know is about to die, you're going to die in 12 months, within 12 months, then maybe that's someone. Any questions so far? So we have this Talmud, the passage in the Talmud that, identifies you can't really choose, but then we have this machloket between the Noda B'Yehuda and the Minchat Chinuch, who seem to say, well, maybe you can choose. Maybe there are certain times when you can't choose. Any questions on that? Anything I can clarify? All right, so we're going to come back to this machloket. If not today, then if we extend this, we'll continue and resume and finish this next week. We'll come back to that machloket. It's going to have some interesting practical ramifications for triage today. So, yeah, so source number 5, so who takes precedence? So we can agree, and we'll see people say this explicitly later on, that we can agree that if you're in a situation where you can't save two people, you can only save one of them, that you have to choose. Meaning, okay, it might be that if it's, we say, Ein doch minevesh, you can't choose one over the other, but there are certain circumstances where we can agree if two people are drowning in the river, you can only have one life raft, you can only get to one of them. We can all agree that the right answer isn't to save neither of them, right? You could say, well, I can't choose which ones to save, so I'm just going to save neither of them. Like, we can agree that that's not the right way to do it. So the question is, you've got to save one. One of them, it has to be saved. It's unacceptable to say that both of them should die. So which one are you going to save, or which one are you going to attempt to save first? So the Mishnah in Masechet Horiot, very end of Horiot, gives the following Mishnah. It says, Ha'ish kodem le'isha lahachayot lahashev aveda. So a man precedes a woman when there is a certainty with regard to them to be rescued. So if you ignore the English, which is the Steinsaltz sort of explaining, but it seems that a man precedes a woman to rescue or to return a lost item, meaning according to this Mishnah, it seems, if you have a man and woman both drowning, you can save one of them, you save the man before you save the woman. The next Mishnah, still on the same page, continues, Kohen kodem le'Levi, Levi le'Yisrael, Yisrael le'Mamzer, Mamzer le'Natin, Natin le'Ger, Ger le'Eved, Meshuchrar, right? And then a Kohen precedes a Levi, Levi, Israelite, Israelite, a Mamzer, Mamzer precedes a Gibeonite, Gibeonite precedes a convert precedes an emancipated slave. Right? There's a series of life value, and then the man precedes the woman, Kohen precedes a Levi, Levi before Yisrael, etc. And then, but it also throws a little wrench there and says, Eimatai, when is that the case? Bizman shekulam shavim. That's when they're all equal in terms of wisdom. But if you had the person towards the very low end of the spectrum who happens to be brilliant, and a person at the high end of the spectrum who's an idiot, you save the person who's at the low end of the spectrum, even though they're at the low end, but they're brilliant, they're a Torah scholar, they precede the high priest, even though the high priest is the high priest, they should seem to be better. So that would be that. So this Mishnah here, at first glance, not even at first glance, I mean, the way everyone reads this Mishnah is that this Mishnah is saying there is a hierarchy to saving people. And there are certain people who are worth more, it seems, in the eyes of the Mishnah, and therefore they should be saved before anyone else. So I'll give you the answer right now before we read sources 6 and 7 and 8. This Mishnah is not in practice. It's not in force. And it's interesting to see why. So, I mean, there's a general rule. Sometimes we just say, like, we don't paskin based on a Mishnah. Mishnah could say whatever it says, but the way halachic authority, the way Jewish law works doesn't follow. It's not necessarily a straight line. Mishnah says this, and therefore that's what we do. And this is a perfect example of that. So the Shut Maim Chaim, Rabbi Chaim David, son of Rabbi Moshe Halevi, born in Jerusalem, I lost the page. Born in Jerusalem in 1924, fighting in the War of Independence, became the chief rabbi of several neighborhoods, became the rabbi of Rishon LeZion, rabbi of Tel Aviv, passed away in 98. Okay. He says, Ach kefi shenira lahalan, lo nifsak ken lahalacha. It says, it seems that this Mishnah is not in practice. We don't follow this Mishnah. And he says, yeah, so as Mark just says, the Mishnah, isn't it strange the rabbis are talking about triage for saving a person and returning a lost item? Yeah, so that's going to be part of it, that the part of the conversation of whether or not if you ignore the Steinsaltz English, part of the conversation of authorities afterwards is, what does lahachayot mean? Lahachayot lahashev aveda. So it sounds like it means to keep them alive, but maybe it's referring to precedence in charity. And then you're talking about something financial, you're not necessarily talking about life-saving. Right? That's part of, it's also interesting, I didn't think about this till right now, but if you remember from last class, we talked about the concept of saving, lo talmud adam recha, that you have to save your fellow's life. The Talmud entertains that you could learn that from a lost object. So maybe there is actually a link between saving a life and a lost object, but that what you're observing is something that's argued back and forth that I didn't quote, but that comes to part of the conversation as to why people don't quote this Mishnah and Horiot as authoritative for saving a life. because maybe it's not actually talking about saving a life. So that's a very good observation. So he says, look, this Mishnah, Sheken HaRambam, when Maimonides talks about within the laws of giving charity, quotes this Mishnah, Katav Kol Chilukei Hadinim Shel Mishnah. It refers to all the different things in this Mishnah. But that piece about a man preceding a woman is not mentioned anywhere in Maimonides. He says, V'gam HaTur Hishmit Din Zo. And the Tur, another powerful halachic authority, omits this. Umaran HaBeit Yosef Sham Bepersho Shitat HaRambam Bazeh. He's Kira Mishnah. And even the Beit Yosef, who authored the Shulchan Aruch, which is the most authoritative, probably the most authoritative volume of Jewish law, even the Beit Yosef, in his work called the Beit Yosef, he quotes Maimonides, and then he mentions this Mishnah. And there, the Beit Yosef says that this Mishnah means that a man precedes a woman when they're both drowning in the river, you can only save one of them. So even Beit Yosef, even though he acknowledges that this is the reality in the Mishnah, nonetheless, in his final magnum opus of the Shulchan Aruch, where he lays down the law, not just its commentary, which is the Beit Yosef, but when he lays down the law, he shmit din ze legamre. He completely omits this part of the life of a male preceding a female. It appears to me that the most writers omitted it. That is to say that even though it's on the books, when it comes to authorities making rulings about what the who actually takes precedence in the life-saving thing, it's omitted. And so you could make the argument, you could see that Rav Moshe Feinstein, the seventh source, born in Russia, 1895, died in 1986, okay, in a longer series of response, he says, Devadai pashut ubarur v'yadua l'chol ben Torah, the Yerei Shemayim. It is obvious and clear and known to any Torah learner and one who fears heaven. Shemechuyavim lerapot lehatzil b'ma she'efshar l'kol adam b'lo shum chiluk b'chokhmato v'da'ato. We save lives without discrimination. V'af inyan kedima leka, and there is no rule of precedence el b'ma shenatam b'mishnah de sof horiot, in that which it said in horiot. V'af be'elu kasha lasot maseh b'lo iyun gadol. He says it's impossible for us to adhere to what the Mishnah says without taking a great amount of time to investigate. So it sounds like what Rav Moshe is saying is that, how would you know? If someone says, well, look, Mark Saper duchened on Shavuos, so doesn't that mean that he's a Kohen? So we should save his life first. Well, not necessarily that, because maybe he's, who knows? Maybe he just always duchened because he was nervous that if he was drowning in a river, how do we know that Mark's actually a Kohen? Okay, he says he's a Kohen, but you're going to believe him? He's claiming he's a Kohen is just to save his life right now. Who knows that he's... So maybe that's what Moshe Feinstein is saying, that it's impossible to know exactly how would you know? How would you be able to do this? And yeah, I think the fact that Rambam leaves this out is very strange. And it's hard to understand, which is what motivates them to say that this is not in force for whatever reason. But I don't have a good explanation as to why. It could be that he felt that this was not talking about life-saving. He thought this was talking about charity or things of that nature, and so maybe he didn't think it was relevant. But it is bizarre that Maimonides doesn't say anything here about it. I should say I don't know enough. Is it rare? I don't know enough Rambam to be able to say whether I with confidence that it's rare or not. I mean, I don't know. I will say, full disclosure, the Ramah, or Moshe Isserles, does quote this idea of a man preceding a woman, but a lot of the commentaries and the Maim Chaim, Rabbi Chaim David, son of Moshe Halevi, so he actually explains why, even though the Ramah of Moshe Isserles said it, he didn't actually mean it. He meant something else. And so even if you were to say that he said it, he really didn't actually say what you think he says. And that seems to be what a lot of people are saying, that we don't apply this. Rav Moshe, though, it's interesting that Rav Moshe Feinstein here is saying, it sounds like what he's saying is that in theory, the rules are good. It's just really hard to know. And he seems to include, I mean, it should be easy to know whether someone's a male or female, but he still thinks even that you shouldn't do. It would be hard to actually pull that off, actually impossible. Maybe he means morally, ethically, I don't know, maybe he means it'd be, I'm not sure, but he thinks that we throw out Horio, we don't accept it. Just to skip forward in time to Rav Hershel Schachter from YU, has a similar piece in a tshuva that he wrote. We're going to look at the tshuva more in full later, but he says this also. He says, "Mishnah b'sof Horiot, Daf Yud Gimel, Huva Seder Kedimut b'Hatzalat Nefashot." It gives the order of saving lives, and I gave in the English translation. I basically summarized a lot of these, but I'll read them through completely in the Hebrew. L'sof ita shama shemamzer tamid chacham kodem. So it gives a whole series of hierarchy, and then it says at the end that the lowest end, but is a Talmid Chacham, is preferred to the Kohen, even if he's an idiot, if the Kohen's an idiot. He says, "V'nira shehakovea bazeh hu shemakdimim lahatzil et zeh she'akila tzricha lo biyoter." He says, it seems like, why would you prefer person A to person B? It seems like what the Mishnah is laying out for us is the asset, who's an asset to the community. The greater asset to the community takes precedence, because we care about the livelihood of the success of the community. He says, "Vayen bigrov Moshe shekashe lasot maseh al pi klalei haMishnah b'li iyun gadol." And he says, just note the fact that Rav Moshe Feinstein says the same thing, that it's hard for us to enforce this, quoting what we just read. Then he puts in parentheses, trying to explain this. He says, "Mistama haitama dahachi ita shemash v'mishnah shayish kodem leisha lahachayot mistama haitama shegvarim mekayimim yoter mitzvot me'asher hanashim sheptirot mimitzvat aseh zman grama." Rav Schachter says, look, maybe what the Mishnah was thinking is that men are obligated in mitzvot that women are not obligated in. Women are exempt from time-bound positive mitzvot. And so that means that if you have a man who's fulfilling every mitzvah that's incumbent upon him, and a woman who's fulfilling every mitzvah that's incumbent upon her, that the net value of mitzvot being done will be higher for the man than for the woman, because there's more things he has to do than for the woman. He says, but uvizmanenu, nowadays, yesh harben nashim she'oskot b'torah mitzvot yoter me'asher hagvarim. He says, wow, but you can't say that. Maybe in the times of the Mishnah, you could easily argue that everyone was super religious and everyone did every mitzvah. But nowadays, it's like you have women who are significantly more brilliant, perform significantly more mitzvot than the men. So you can't imply that. He says, the whole presumption was that the person who is more valuable takes precedence, but there is no way for us to evaluate that nowadays. Maybe in the times of the Mishnah, it was easier, they made that assumption, but you can't make that assumption. We'll get to that. We'll get to what it means for what lives to save soon. He says, he says, and Rav Schachter concludes, it says it's impossible, it's so hard for us to know who's more valuable to the community, because we have this, my chazid, we saw the Talmud earlier on, say like, how can you say who's more valuable than the other person? It says it is accepted among all halachic authorities. We do not care about that. We do not, this Mishnah does not come into play in practice. And so when it comes to deciding who takes precedence, we can't look to this Mishnah as saying who's going to take precedence. Okay, we'll get to who actually does take precedence in a little bit, but I want to first, any questions on this? So Mark Bernstein asked about, so according to Rav Moshe Feinstein, what is the method for triage? So we're going to say, actually, I don't think I quoted his tshuva in full here, but we're going to see basically everyone is on the same page, and we'll get to it in sources 12 and 13. We'll look at two contemporary, like real contemporary, talking about Corona, Rabbi Hershel Schachter and Rabbi Asher Weiss. We'll see, and I think what Rav Moshe Feinstein says is in line with them as well. But the idea of choosing man over woman in that Mishnah in Horia, which you may be, it may be attractive to say, well, we should just follow the Mishnah, that everyone is saying it's ruled out. We don't practice this Mishnah. Any other questions on these sources before we move on? Okay, so let's look at source number 7, making and then changing your decision. So this first is Rav Shlomo Zalman. So this source number 9, Shut Minchat Shlomo, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, 1910, head of Kol Torah, taught many students. They became rabbis and Torah scholars. Recognized one of the prominent poskim of his time. Many of his decisions and works related to the halachic problems that arose with the introduction of modern technology. One of his most famous things was talking about electricity, which people didn't seem to know the science of exactly what it was and how it worked and what the permissibility was and how it impacted Shabbat. But here's what he says. He says, okay, he says, first of all, it's very difficult in practice to follow Horiot, meaning right off the bat, there's text before and text below, but he quotes Horiot and he says, that mission in Horiot about who takes precedence, we have to throw that out. You can't act that way. Ulam, להעביר מכשיר הנשמה מחולה לאחר, שהוא במצב יותר קשה, או שיש לשני יותר סיכויים להצלה, מסופקני מאוד. He says, let's say you have a situation of, I don't know, why does it say an hour time? I don't know if he's, without saying anachronistically, I don't know if he's thinking the same thing that Rav Hershel Schachter thought, which was that maybe in the times of the Mishnah, the assumption was you could very clearly line up who is more valuable in a community because social communal roles were very clear and set, but now it's not. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if he means in practice. I'm not sure if he means that a hospital that operates under that is open up to lawsuits. I'm not sure why he says specifically in our time. But he says, so to move a ventilator from person who's, so you have person A and person B, Joe and Fred. Joe's on the ventilator and Fred comes in and Fred's in a significantly worse state. To remove the ventilator from Joe and give it to Fred, he says, I'm not sure about that. I'm very unsure. Because you could make the argument, it's possible that Joe, who was on the ventilator first, already acquired the device. And I put in parentheses in English, the right to the device. He seemed to have already acquired the device. It's his now. And certainly, now that it's Joe's ventilator, he doesn't have to give the ventilator to Fred. And thinking back to the case of the two people in the desert, when Rabbi Akiva says, if you have two people lost in the desert, they only have one jug of water, the person who's got the jug of water gets to drink the water. They don't have to split it, right? He doesn't have to give his ventilator to someone else because the other person is in a worse state because he'll die if he doesn't have a ventilator. Joe can keep the ventilator. He says, "V'chen im kvar hitchil harofa litasek im chola mesukan, mistaber de kemosha osav mitzvah patur min mitzvah, kachu patur v'lai asur milhaniach et harishon litasek im hasheni, k'shishneim b'sakana." He says, and the same thing for a doctor. A doctor can't go from patient A to patient B and say, I'm going to start treating patient B because patient B is in more dire straits. You can't choose to do that. The person A has already has the right to that treatment. And for the doctor to choose Fred over Joe now that he's started with Joe, he or she, the doctor can't now switch to treat Fred. Rav Shlomo Zalman gives it language like he's osek b'mitzvah. Even if you'll say, well, it's a mitzvah for him to save Fred. Yeah, but he's already doing a mitzvah of saving the life of Joe. He's not allowed. He's exempt and maybe even forbidden from turning his attention to Fred because that might end up adversely impacting Joe. And then there is a piece that appears in manuscript but didn't make it into the printing. But I heard a class which had this manuscript, which has a couple different things. The manuscript says, regarding the ventilator, he puts initially Baruch Hashemesh. It's as clear as the sun, clear as day, but then he crosses it out, so I put it in parentheses. Choshvani shetalui hashikul hadat. I lost my place. Shal rofev imal pi rov zekfar lelo toelet mutav lavir et zelashini. In the manuscript, Shlomo Zalman says, but if you're in a situation where Joe is on the ventilator, but according to doctors, medical experts, it's no longer effective or efficient or helpful for Joe to be on this machine. It's not going to do anything for him. He's done. He's dead. He might be alive. He might be attached to this ventilator, but he has no chance. In that case, initially, Rav Shlomo Zalman seems to write it's clear as day, and then he says, I think, and then in the printed version, it's excluded entirely. So you see that he probably had some sort of change in heart, wasn't entirely sure. But he says that he suggests that perhaps it's conceivable that when Joe's already on the respirator, but Joe's gone, Joe's not going to survive, that in that case, you may be able to remove the ventilator from Joe and give it to Fred. And then he says, "V'agid lo ne'emana she'enani kovea misamrim b'chol ma shekatavti ki hashilot han chamurot ma'od." He says, "This is a really, really." He says, "I'm not trying to give practical thing here because this is really, really chamur. We're talking about really grave issues, and I'm not prepared to say this, nail this down with any level of absolute." And he also says the following things: and someone comes in who's a treifa, that is someone who's probably not going to survive. The hospital, whose policy is to not immediately hook them up to a ventilator, that's probably correct. Im emethu ki divreihem, if it's true, sheyom yom hem metzilim ba anashim shleimim, because if there are other people who come in who are in better situations, it seems that there it's appropriate for them to withhold the ventilator from someone who's a treifa, that is, who's closer to dying, than to, if you know there's going to be a shalem who's more likely to survive, who's going to be coming in, any minute now. He says, "Ach gam ein ze kol kach bar," but even that's not so clear. So what he's suggesting, what's coming up with this, is that we said before, who can say whose blood is red? We said, well, is it rhetorical or is it a sincere question? The Noda B'Yehuda said, it's a rhetorical question. There's no way you could possibly answer. And the Mincha Chinuch says, well, maybe you can answer. It sounds like Rav Shlomo Zalman is leaning towards, but not saying absolutely, but leaning towards the Mincha Chinuch's approach to say, well, there are some times that maybe we can say person A's blood is better, is more valuable. So in this case, if you have the treifa coming in, and you know there's going to be a shalem coming in, he's saying he's not willing to say you can kill the treifa in order to save the shalem. So he's not saying that it's you could definitely kill the treifa, but he's saying that maybe it's conceivable. And I think what's leading him to think that it's obvious, or I think what he's struggling with is that question of whether we can ever actually say Joe's life is more valuable than Fred's. And initially he thinks it's certainly obvious that the shalem who comes in should be saved because their life is more valuable than the treifa. The person who's going to live is more valuable than the person who might die. But he's not sure. And I think that tension of that Mincha Chinuch and that Noda B'Yehuda comes up here. Yeah, Mark Bernstein.
Sorry, I'm just going to ask, isn't that, it doesn't seem like a typical case of triage. If it's a treifa is not a category of people, like women, or treifa, somebody who's terminally ill, or is going to die within 12 months. Isn't there a big difference between those? I mean, in other words,
right, so he's saying the rules of Kadima, the rules of precedent from Horiot, he's throwing out, and he's saying, so now what we maybe we should, and this he's thinking along the lines of we saw earlier Noda B'Yehuda and the Mincha Chinuch, who are saying, throwing out all the other categories. If all we have is someone who's a treifa, who is terminally, they're going to die within 12 months, and a shalem who's probably not going to die within 12 months, assuming they both get this treatment, all other things being equal, even if they both have the treatment, they recover, one's going to live short and one's going to live a long time. Maybe thinking along the lines of the Mincha Chinuch, and the Mincha Chinuch who said, you're allowed to kill, the Mincha Chinuch said thought you were allowed to kill a treifa in order to save a shalem. So certainly in this case, where you're just removing them from the ventilator, maybe you could certainly do that according to the Mincha. I think that's what's going on in Rav Shlomo Zalman's, what he's trying to think about is that question. Having thrown out the Mishnah in Horiot, does that help or not really?
Yeah, because I just don't see the situations as parallel. It's like, one's a case of triage where you have healthy people, assuming they're all healthy, who do you save first? But this is a case where one of them is going to die. And to me, it seems Baruch Kashemish that you would save the person who, and why does he have hesitation? Why does he delete that line where he says, Baruch Hashemesh, and why does he say even this is not completely clear, and why does he hesitate?
Because I think he knows that the Talmud said my chazid. The Talmud said we can't. Who knows whose life is more valuable?
But that's what I'm saying. It's not a case that in the Talmud, aren't they talking about people who are healthy? They're not.
Yeah. I mean, but I think, yeah, yes. I mean, we also the ein dochin. We have the concept of ein dochin nefesh, mitoch nefesh. We can't save. We can't just say, we can't save one life for the other. Like, I think he knows that the force of Jewish tradition has said things like this, that said that you can't choose person A over person B. And I think that's why he's hesitating. I think he might also be concerned about what it opens the doors to. He doesn't say that explicitly here, but I could imagine someone saying this could be a very slippery slope once we start saying, I mean, he's already rejected Horiot, but so now to bring in and say, well, but maybe there are times when you could say someone's life is more valuable than another. But I'll say, and I think we're definitely not gonna. Well, we'll actually stop with this source, and next week we'll recap and then continue, and we'll do this sheet into two, and then whatever we were gonna do next week we won't do now. But so we'll finish up with this piece of Rav Shlomo Zalman right now, and say that Rav Shlomo Zalman is I think what's causing him to hesitate is it seems that according to modern sensibilities and morality that if person A is a goner, you got to save person B. But he's saying like, but who's to say that we can make that call? I think that's what's really getting to him. And whereas it was a question for him, I'll cheat. And even though we're not going to read this tshuva inside now, in the next source, or actually in two sources from now, in source number 11, we're going to see someone who thinks that it's definitely clear in the Mishnah Halachot, and we'll look at that next week. So we'll do that together in a week. But whereas Shlomo Zalman was really not sure whether you could pull it off, the Mishnah Halachot, Ramosha Klein is he's very comfortable. But I'll say that in modern, at least in the tshuva of Herschel Schachter and Rav Asher Weiss, writing in the last 3 months, both of them are very hesitant to ever remove someone from a ventilator. And I think like the standard practice in Israel, I mean, I remember hearing about this when I was in high school. I don't know if this is still the case, but I think it's still the case. But like the best workaround that they would have is attaching ventilators and things like that to a timer. That the timer is on for an hour and then it'll turn off, and so the doctor then has to go and turn it back on. And so if they've decided that this person is no longer valuable, they shouldn't keep them alive anymore. So to take with their hands and remove the ventilator, they're not willing to do. But to not turn the ventilator on, that's okay. And I think that's something that, like Shaare Zedek Hospital, and I think that's something that's in practice, because it sort of removes the activeness of, no doctor wants to think of them killing a patient, but so this sort of removes the feeling of practically removing someone from a ventilator. So the ventilator's off, so I'm gonna just attach it to that person. But yeah, I mean, I think part of the question here that it comes down to is, are we sort of utilitarian? Are we saying, like, whatever is the most good for the most number of people is the right action to do? And if person B is if the first person's basically gonna die, there's no question he's gonna die. So then the most good for the most people is to put it on person B. Like, do we believe that, or do we have some sort of like, categorical imperative that murder is always wrong, whether you're disconnecting someone from a ventilator or whether you're shooting them in the head? Like, killing is wrong. I think that's part of to way oversimplify. What's the word I'm looking for? Simplicize. That's not a word. What's the word I'm looking for?
Simplify.
Simplify. There we go. Simplicize. I think we're definitely oversimplifying it, but yeah, that's. I think that's very much a factor here. Is trying to figure out how we view this. We're gonna stop here because I also have to go back to ABBA duties. But we'll continue. Next week we will recap a lot of this stuff here briefly, and then we'll continue with this, and then going to look at contemporary Chuvot and contemporary analyses of how to handle corona in triage in March, April, and May, and unfortunately maybe into the future as well. But how halachic authorities are talking about it.
Shakar.
Any questions on this before we leave? Knowing that sorry, Mark.
I just wanted to say thank you.
Oh, good. You're welcome. My pleasure to be here and to teach this. And okay. So we'll continue next week with more of this fun triage. And God willing, this should not have to be practical for anyone. And everyone who comes into any hospital will be easily have the equipment and personnel to be able to take care of them and to save their lives in ways that it seems like doctors are continuing to do now with the numbers. It seems like continuing to drop. It should just only continue. All right. Thank you for coming, and we'll continue next week.
Bye.
See you guys.